Shadows of the Fourth Wing Part 1. The Awakening Chapter 1. The call of the shadows. The sky bled into hues of crimson and violet, bruised by the weight of the coming storm. Elysia sat at the edge of the village, her back pressed against the rough bark of an old oak, her thoughts drifting like the cold winds that swept through the valley. The evening's chill clung to her skin, but she barely noticed it, her mind consumed by the dreams that had haunted her for weeks. Dreams of dark wings cutting through the night sky, of shadows dancing just beyond the reach of light, and of a figure cloaked in mystery, his eyes burning with a fire she did not understand. She closed her eyes, trying to shake the image from her thoughts, but it clung to her like a persistent whisper in the dark. Every night, the same dream. Every night, the figure would draw closer, his voice silent yet commanding, calling her into the unknown. The village below was quiet, the final rays of sunlight casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. From her vantage point, she could see the familiar sights of her small world, the healer's cottage where she had been trained, the narrow paths winding through fields of wheat, and the distant hills that marked the edge of her reality. It was a simple life, and until recently, she had been content. But the dreams had changed everything. Elysia. The voice, deep and smooth like the low rumble of thunder, broke through her thoughts. Her heart jolted in her chest, and she spun around, eyes wide. No one was there, only the darkening forest and the wind whistling through the trees. Her breath came quick, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if to steady the rapid beating of her heart. "You're losing your mind," she whispered to herself. But the voice had been so clear, as if the figure from her dreams had stepped into the waking world. "Elysia." This time, the voice was closer, more insistent. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath her, and scanned the tree line. Her healer's instincts told her to run, to return to the village and seek the safety of her home. But something else, something deep and primal, urged her forward, toward the forest where the shadows grew thick and the light of day could not penetrate. Without understanding why, she took a step toward the darkness. The forest was dense, the towering trees casting long fingers of shadow that seemed to stretch out and beckon her closer. Each step she took was met with the soft crunch of leaves beneath her boots, the air growing colder with every breath. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from a strange sense of anticipation. It was as if something was waiting for her, something that had been calling to her long before the dreams had begun. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the wind died, leaving only the eerie silence of the forest. The branches above twisted and gnarled, their shapes forming dark, intricate patterns against the sky. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed on, driven by an inexplicable pull, like a moth to flame. And then she saw him. He stood at the edge of a clearing, his back turned to her, his wings spread wide and dark as the night itself. The air around him seemed to ripple, as though the very fabric of the world bent in his presence. Elysia's breath caught in her throat. She had seen those wings before, felt their weight in her dreams, but seeing them now, in the waking world, sent a chill down her spine. The figure turned slowly, his movements fluid, almost unnatural. His face remained hidden beneath the hood of his cloak, but she could feel his gaze on her, piercing through the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. "Who are you?" Elysia's voice was barely more than a whisper, though she wasn't sure if she wanted an answer. The figure took a step forward, his wings folding behind him with a soft rustle. "You know who I am, Elysia." Her pulse quickened. "No, I don't." "You do," he insisted, his voice low and commanding. "You've felt my presence, seen me in your dreams. I have been watching you." A tremor of fear shot through her. "Why?" The figure tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. "Because you are marked, Elysia. You carry within you the blood of the Fourth Wing." Elysia took a step back, her heart racing. The Fourth Wing. The name was whispered only in the darkest corners of legend, a faction of winged warriors exiled for their greed, their hunger for power. They had been forgotten by most, their stories buried under layers of time and fear. But she had heard the tales, everyone had. And none of them ended well. "I'm not," she began, but the figure cut her off. "You are," he said, his voice unwavering. "And whether you like it or not, your destiny is tied to the shadows." The air around them grew colder, the darkness pressing in. Elysia's mind raced, but she found herself unable to move, unable to tear her gaze from the figure before her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, she could see his eyes beneath the hood, deep, endless pools of darkness that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. "To claim your power," he said softly, "and to show you who you truly are." Elysia's breath caught as the shadows around him seemed to reach for her, curling around her feet like tendrils of smoke. And in that moment, she knew that her life would never be the same again. Chapter 2. A stranger in the woods. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The wind had stilled, the trees themselves seeming to hold their breath as Elysia ventured deeper into the shadows. She had no clear direction, only the pull in her chest, that unshakable sense that someone, was waiting for her beyond the edge of her small world. It was the same feeling that had haunted her for weeks, ever since the dreams had started. She paused beneath the twisted branches of an ancient oak, her fingers brushing the rough bark as if seeking comfort from its steady presence. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the last remnants of light filtered through the canopy in thin, golden streaks. But even they seemed reluctant to enter the darkness that lay before her. Elysia's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, to return to the safety of her village, to the healer's cottage where everything was familiar. But something stronger, something deeper, kept her feet rooted to the forest floor. And then she saw him. He stepped from the shadows as if he had been carved from the very darkness itself, his movements fluid and deliberate. Black wings, vast and sleek, unfurled behind him, catching what little light remained and casting an otherworldly shimmer across the clearing. His cloak billowed around him like smoke, merging with the forest's shadows until it was impossible to tell where he ended and the night began. Elysia's breath hitched in her throat. The figure from her dreams, the one who had haunted her nights, had stepped into her waking world. He was real. She should have been afraid. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to flee, yet she couldn't move. His presence was magnetic, pulling her toward him even as a voice in the back of her mind urged her to run. "Who are you?" Her voice was little more than a whisper, carried away by the wind before she could take it back. The man stepped forward, his boots barely making a sound against the forest floor. His eyes, dark and endless, fixed on her, and for a moment, Elysia felt as though the entire world had narrowed to just the space between them. "I am what you fear," he said, his voice smooth and deep, like the low rumble of distant thunder. "But also what you need." Elysia's heart raced. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you'll get for now." His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the sharp angles of his face, the pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. His wings rustled behind him, a sound like the sigh of the wind through the trees, and she found herself mesmerized by their sheer beauty and danger. "What do you want?" Elysia forced herself to keep her voice steady, though inside, her emotions twisted in a confused knot: fear, curiosity, and something else she couldn't name. He tilted his head slightly, as though studying her. "I could ask the same of you, Elysia." Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. How did he know her? The dreams had been vague, blurred images of wings and shadows, but never once had they spoken. And yet, he stood here, real and impossibly close, with her name rolling off his tongue like a secret he had held for years. "You've been watching me," she said, a realization that sent another wave of unease through her. "For longer than you can imagine," he replied, his voice softening, though the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. "You've felt it, haven't you? The pull of the shadows, the call of something greater than this." He gestured vaguely toward the village hidden behind the trees. "This simple life." Elysia's throat tightened. She had felt it, that gnawing sense that her life was meant for more than healing wounds and gathering herbs in the forest. But she had always pushed it aside, chalking it up to daydreams and restless nights. Until the dreams had started. "You don't know anything about me," she said, though even as the words left her lips, she wasn't sure if she believed them. He stepped closer, and the air around her seemed to shift, growing colder, sharper. "I know more than you realize." Elysia's pulse quickened. His nearness was intoxicating, like standing at the edge of a cliff, teetering between fear and exhilaration. She could smell the faint scent of something wild on him, like rain on scorched earth, and it stirred something deep within her. "You carry the blood of the fourth wing," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur, as if he were sharing a dangerous secret. "The blood of those who were cast out, forgotten by the other wings. But not lost." Elysia's heart stopped. The fourth wing. The name was spoken only in hushed whispers, a faction of winged warriors who had once ruled the skies with power and darkness, exiled for their insatiable greed. They were the stuff of legends, feared and revered, but they had disappeared long before she had been born. "That's impossible," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I'm just a healer?" He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "You are much more than that, Elysia. You've always known it, deep down. That's why you were drawn here. Why you found me." She shook her head, taking a step back, but he didn't follow. He didn't need to. His words had already taken hold, sinking into the cracks in her defenses. "You have a choice," he said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You can stay in the safety of your village, pretending that you're nothing more than a healer. Or you can step into the shadows, embrace your true nature, and claim the power that is your birthright." Elysia's chest tightened, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The logical part of her screamed that this was madness, that she should turn around and leave this dark stranger behind. But another part of her, the part that had always longed for more, ached to believe him. "I'll find you again when you're ready," he said, his voice a soft promise as he began to step back into the shadows. His wings unfurled, dark and vast, and with a single beat, he was gone. Elysia stood frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been. The silence of the forest pressed in around her once more, but the world had shifted beneath her feet. She was no longer the same. And somewhere deep within, she knew she would follow him into the shadows. Chapter 3. The mark of the fourth wing. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon finally broke, sending sheets of rain cascading through the forest canopy. Elysia ran, the cold droplets stinging her skin, but she barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was a tangled mass of confusion, disbelief, and something darker, a pull she couldn't explain, a whisper that wouldn't leave her. Lucien's words echoed through her mind, heavy and laden with a truth she wasn't ready to face. "You carry the blood of the fourth wing." Her feet pounded against the wet earth, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She had to get away, to escape the shadows that clung to her like a second skin since meeting him in the woods. But no matter how far or fast she ran, she couldn't outrun the knowledge. The air felt thick with it, suffocating her as surely as if his wings had wrapped around her once more. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and fell to her knees, the cold mud soaking through her dress. She gasped for breath, her hands digging into the earth as if she could somehow ground herself in the world she had known before Lucian, before the dreams, before everything. But nothing felt real anymore. Elysia raised her head, rain dripping from her hair and face. Through the mist and the storm, she could see the faint glow of the village lights in the distance, warm and inviting. A life she had once thought simple, perhaps even small, but now seemed impossibly distant, like a memory of someone else's past. Was it truly hers? Could she return to that life knowing what she knew now? "The blood of the fourth wing runs through your veins." "No," she whispered to herself, though the words sounded hollow, like it had already been stripped of meaning. The wind howled through the trees, whipping her hair around her face, as if the storm itself knew the secret she was struggling to deny. The fourth wing. She had heard the legends, of course, everyone had. The winged warriors, fallen from grace, exiled for their insatiable lust for power. They had once ruled the skies, unmatched in strength and magic, until their ambition had led them down a path of darkness so deep, even the other wings had feared them. They were said to be cursed, bound forever to the shadows they had embraced, forgotten by all but the faintest whispers of myth. But those were just stories. Weren't they? Elysia clenched her fists in the mud, the cold seeping into her bones. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from the world, from the storm, from Lucian. But the answers had already been given, and they terrified her more than the questions. "Why me?" she muttered, her voice trembling as she pushed herself up to stand. Her body shook, whether from the cold or the weight of what she had learned, she wasn't sure. And then, through the downpour, she heard it. A soft fluttering, like the wings of a bird in flight. But heavier, darker. Her pulse quickened, a familiar tension wrapping itself around her chest, tightening like a noose. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "You came." Lucien's voice was like silk, smooth and quiet, cutting through the roar of the storm. He didn't need to shout. His presence was enough to fill the air, to make it impossible to breathe anything but him. Elysia turned slowly, her breath catching as her eyes found his. He stood in the rain, as if the storm didn't dare touch him, his wings folded elegantly behind him, their black feathers glistening like obsidian. He was both beautiful and terrible, a creature born of darkness but carrying a strange, undeniable allure. "I didn't come for you," she said, though the lie was evident in the way her voice wavered. She didn't know why she was there. Maybe she had been running toward something, rather than away. Lucien's lips curled into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No? Then why are you here, Elysia? Why did you come to the forest? Why did you follow the call of the shadows?" Her heart raced. She didn't have an answer, not one she was willing to speak aloud. "You know what you are," he continued, stepping closer, the space between them closing with each soft, deliberate movement. "You felt it the moment you saw me, didn't you? That pull, that connection. You are not like them." He gestured toward the distant village. "You never were." Elysia's throat tightened, the weight of his words pressing down on her like the rain. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that she was just a healer, a girl who wanted nothing more than a simple life. But the truth had already wormed its way into her heart, poisoning everything she thought she knew. "I'm nothing," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the storm. "Just a girl. I don't know anything about wings or shadows." Lucien's expression softened, though his eyes remained intense, unreadable. "You are more than you think, Elysia. The mark of the fourth wing runs through your blood. It has been waiting, dormant, until now." He reached for her, his fingers brushing against her wrist. The touch sent a shock through her, as if the darkness itself had seeped into her veins, awakening something ancient and powerful. She gasped, pulling her hand away, but the sensation lingered, a cold heat that spread through her body, igniting parts of her soul she hadn't even known existed. "You can feel it, can't you?" Lucien's voice was a low murmur, filled with both promise and danger. "The power inside you. It's only a matter of time before you embrace it." Elysia shook her head, taking a step back, but her body betrayed her, every part of her drawn to him, to the shadows he carried with him like a cloak. "I don't want it," she said, though the words felt weak, false. "Lies," Lucien said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're afraid, yes, but you also crave it. The power, the freedom, the truth of who you are." The storm howled around them, the wind whipping through the trees like a chorus of whispers. Elysia's heart pounded, every beat echoing the pull of the darkness, the call of the wings she hadn't even known were hers to claim. Lucien stepped closer, his breath warm against her rain-soaked skin. "Embrace it, Elysia. Embrace who you are. The mark of the fourth wing is yours." And in that moment, standing in the midst of the storm, the rain and wind swirling around them, Elysia knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The darkness had found her, and there was no turning back.